Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. Welcome to How to Ask for What You Want. I'm really passionate about this topic, really passionate about this. I'm going to start with a story from when I was working in the corporate world. I was a senior manager and I was asked to be on the leadership team. Very exciting opportunity. Thinking, oh my gosh, this is amazing. Yes, of course. Well, everybody else on the leadership team was director or above. And even though the organization was really flat, I was thinking, I've been technically in this title of senior manager for several years now. I would like to be a director and or more, whatever that would look like. And I remember asking my boss at the time, okay, so everybody else is director or above. What does this mean for me? And she said, oh, yeah, we'll have to look at all that. She was distracted. I asked her at a time where she was working on something else. And then a few months later, then ended up joining the leadership team, was very excited about that. And I remember thinking, I never heard back about that. And I brought it up again a little bit later to another leader in the company that was in a place of decision-making power. And the conversation was just kind of didn't really conclude to anything much. And fast forward to probably 8 months later, I had my review. I was expecting a promotion to director. What happened? No promotion. And my boss looked at me and said she could sense something was wrong. She goes, what's going on? And I said, well, I have to admit, I thought that I was going to be promoted. I had asked you about director. I've been on the leadership team. I know I'm doing a good job. And she said, oh, wow. I mean, she felt so bad. She didn't remember. And this, folks, is on me. I would have done that so much differently now looking back. Here's what I would have done differently. I would have made a direct ask. And she and I actually chuckled about it because the problem was that I didn't ask directly. It was so passive. It was, well, being on the leadership team, everybody else is director above, kind of this leaving that hanging. It's like a rescue wish. That's something from psychology. Some of you know more about this than me, that like as a little baby, when we cry, that's our rescue wish. And then of course, the adult, in an ideal scenario, the adult would come and comfort the child. And notice that as an adult, a rescue wish is where we think someone's going to notice us. And just like a lot of women, we all get this, right? You say, oh, someone will notice that I'm doing a job. If I work hard enough, they're going to notice. No, we can't rely on other people to notice those things and give us what we want, because how will they even know what we want if we don't ask for what we want? I would have gone second time, redo. I would have said, hey, boss, I would really like to be a director. Everybody else on the leadership team is director or above, and that's what I want too. How can I get there? I want to create a plan. That would have been such a different experience and given me such a different result. Sadly, I missed out on 8 months of opportunity where I could have been working toward that with a very clear goal, with clear deliverables about what I could be doing to get closer to that goal. What ended up happening is we set up another meeting after that review to talk about what it would take to get me there. And it was very helpful, but it felt like I wasted so much time. I don't want that for you. Make sure that you ask directly. And that is key point number one. For my linear folks in the room, I always like to give points. Direct versus passive asks. I don't know if anybody can relate to this, but I've told a few other people in my social circles, and most people can. Years ago, I was laughing because as I'm recording this on May 3rd, I have just come back from another wonderful trip in Minnesota. And my mom did pass away last June, as many of you know, But this is a story that was really funny when I went back years back and visited my mom. It was such a classic scene. We're driving, rather, I'm driving. She's in the passenger seat. I'm going to drive her to her doctor's appointment. And I didn't know where it was. So I was following her instructions. We got to a T in the road at the end of 68th Street and Lindell, for those of you from the area. And I said, as we were approaching the intersection where I had to turn right or left, I said, Mom, which way do I turn? And she said, well, you might want to turn right. And I went, do you want me to turn right? Or just, is that just a maybe? I could also go left. Like, what's the better choice? And she and I both started laughing our heads off, because when we talked about it out loud, it just sounded hilarious. So often we do that. We don't want to directly say, turn right here. And yet what's challenging about this passivity is that, number one, it takes away from clarity. And as Brene Brown says, clear is kind, unclear is unkind. I love that simple quote. A lot of times we're trying to be nice, but what we're actually doing is we're making things more confusing for the listener. So make a direct versus passive ask. If you want something, ask for it. This is another example. I was thinking about this recently. I was working with a client earlier, VP, high level, well respected in her industry. And yet she even said, well, when I talk to people about wanting to move into a different field, I usually say something like, well, what do you think I could do? Or what jobs do you think are out there? And we were talking today about how she needs to be more direct instead of, well, what do you think? Now, that's not a terrible question, but just asking it that way, as if the person knows better than you, is not the way to do this. What I coached her on is to say, I'm moving into this direction of technology in my career field. What perspective can you give me on that? So it was a much more empowering feel of, I'm moving into this. This is what I want. Even the direction, you don't even have to know exactly what you want, but show people that you have a direction that you're headed. That will make you come across as much more empowered. Okay, let's talk about, when you think about the direct ask, if you're making a direct ask of someone, that's a great first step. But before that, the pre-step to that is figuring out the WIFM, that acronym for what's in it for me, not you as you when you deliver this message. It's what's in it for your audience. Why should they care about what you want to ask? We've got to make sure that we think ahead. What does this audience know about me? What do they think about me? Do they respect me in this particular field? Do they think that I have what it takes? Think about your listener and audience, one and the same audience or listener, and what it is that you might be able to think about in advance to say, okay, this is what they're after. This is where my skills could match with theirs. For example, years and years ago, early on in my career, I was an HR manager for a company, and I was kind of bored with all of that. I respect all of my HR folks out in the room here. I just got bored with compensation and the numbers and all the transactional stuff around HR. I loved the people side of HR. So I thought, you know what? We don't even have a training department in San Francisco. We have one globally, but we don't have one in San Francisco. So I decided I was going to write my own job description and ask to be in that position. So I wrote out an official job description. But what I will tell you, as I wrote that out, I was thinking, why would my boss care about this? First of all, she's a finance person. She's in charge of that, and she really cares most about the money and the profitability of the business. Of course, that makes sense. I had to think about how could I pitch this in a way that she would say yes? And as another boss of mine once said, make it impossible for me to say no. I love that. So I really thought deeper about what value that would bring to the organization. I thought about how we don't have a training department, how so many people could up-level their skills in all these different topics that I was exploring. So things like negotiating, things like how to deal with conflict, how to give and receive feedback, time management, you name it. I was doing all these different, I had all these topics in mind that were ideas of mine that I thought people would care about. And I also thought I could offer these at lunch. If people wanted to come, then they could come. There wouldn't necessarily be any productivity taken away from the work hours. So that's where I started. And without getting into more detail, I sat down with her, pitched the idea based on what I just shared with you. Here's where I believe we could make a difference to the employees. We'd have more engagement and people would feel better morale-wise because they're getting some extra benefit just by being an employee here. And then the next part of that is you've got to communicate your value. So that's when I said, hey, I'm really passionate about this. I've done a lot of research on it. And actually, based on my training before, I have some really good experience that I can bring to the table. So I could do this on my own. You don't have to think about it. I'll set these up. We'll do them at lunch. Well, maybe occasionally we can do a quarterly training for the whole company. And it took off. She said yes. Now, I do want to say this. Sometimes when we want something, we have to recognize the cost. This was way back when during the dot-com boom and bust. And she said to me, I just want you to know, if you go through with this, I'll sign off on it. But if I have to lay somebody off, you're going to be the first one to go because you're essentially saying, you want me to hire a different HR manager and you become the training manager. And I was okay with that. So I was prepared for that. I ended up working for probably 8 months doing that job. And then I went to 3 days a week and then I was laid off, but it was perfect. That was August in 2002 or 2003, I believe it was. Anyway, somewhere in there, and ended up starting my first coaching role as on my own, owning my own business. I've left corporate twice in my life. Okay. So first, let's review direct ask versus passive. Number 2, know your audience. What's in it for them? And, let's go back to the direct asks. I completely forgot about this. We have to recognize what a passive ask sounds like. And sometimes it doesn't sound passive. So I want to tell you this. Working with thousands of people, it's amazing. I record people all the time, and I've had a number of people say, "I swore I did a direct ask," and when I did it, and that's why I love recording, because we can go back and look at the reality. Here are the things people often say. I'm going to give you 3 things people often say where they think it's a direct ask, but it's actually passive, and then I'm going to give you the direct counterparts to that. If you're interested, let me know. If you think this is something you'd like to do, I'm happy to talk more about it. Perhaps you'd like to ... Here's what I would suggest you say instead. Are you interested? Is this something you'd like to do? Would you like to? It's so subtle, but it's really different. And so let me review. Instead of, if you're interested, let me know, say, are you interested? Instead of, if you think this is something you'd like to do, I'm happy to talk more about it. Say, is this something you'd like to do? Third, perhaps you'd like to, instead of saying that, say this, would you like to? These subtle things can make a big difference. The third component here is dealing with no. We can be all hyped up on asking for what you want. And although I have been pretty successful in that, there are times for sure when someone has said no. And I'm sure that's happened for you. And that can also make it harder to go again and be vulnerable enough to make an ask where somebody could say no. You might even have to deal with feelings of rejection or all of these things, especially for those people listening here that are salespeople. Whether you're selling an actual product or service, or you're in the corporate world and you're just trying to sell your ideas. Sometimes people say no, and that can be disheartening. Here's a lesson I want to take from my friend Alex Carter, who wrote the book Ask for More. I love this. If somebody says no, ask them instead of just accepting that. Pause for a moment. And obviously, you've got to use discernment and good judgment, but asking them, what concerns do you have, can open up a whole new world that you wouldn't have known if you didn't bother to ask. That can turn a no into a yes, because you might find that the concerns they have can completely immediately be reworked. And you go, oh, well, that's a concern. And so I want to share another story. This is from Stephen Covey, 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. There, he tells a story in there about 2 coworkers. One was really frustrated that this other guy wanted the window open. And the one who wanted the window open was annoyed at the other guy because he thought, why can't you just deal with having the window open? Why wouldn't you want the window open? Well, when they actually sat down and talked about it, at first it became about the window being open or closed. And it's so funny how we can get into these things that have nothing to do with the actual issue. That's why communication is so critical. He sat down with the other guy and he said, let's talk about this. So here's what came out of it. The guy who wanted the window open, he didn't care about the window being open. He just wanted fresh air. The other guy didn't care about the window being closed. He just didn't want a draft coming straight at him. So what they did as a solution is they opened up a window in another room and the fresh air came in. So one was happy and there was no draft. It's such a simple thing, but it stems from having a conversation. Very important. There's so much we could say about this. If you read my book, you will see I have a whole chapter on how to ask, negotiate to collaborate. And specifically, what I wanted to share is how my dad never took no for an answer. He was relentless when it came to asking. And he always said, the squeaky wheel gets the grease. I can remember that so vividly. He said that a lot in my childhood. So based on what he modeled for me, that's what I believed I could do too. So I was fearless when it came to asking for things. And I always have this expectation that I'm going to get what I ask for. And I have certainly had plenty of times where people said no, but I do think that that is a bonus tip right now to remember that we get what we expect. If you expect good things to happen to you, generally they will. And I'm not dismissing any hardship or things that have happened to people at all. What I'm saying is when you have a general expectation and attitude that, oh, I'm going to get good things, most likely you will, because there is science based on research based on the fact that how we think we become. All right, let's do a full review here. First tip, make a direct versus a passive ask. Second, what's in it for your audience? The with them, figure that out. 3, how to deal with a no, which is to say, what concerns do you have to open up discussion? And then your bonus tip is you get what you expect. Start expecting that you're going to get the things you ask for. And another thing I want to say, be clear. What is it that you want? Because it's really hard to get what you want if you don't know what you want. And I know that sounds so obvious. It's like the scene from The Notebook, which is one of my favorites, where Ryan Gosling says to, what's her name? Rachel something, McAdams, I think, where she says, what do you want? And she can't decide. She's like, I don't know. He's like, what do you want? So definitely something to keep in mind. Be clear about what you want so that you can go out, ask for what you need, and get it. And that's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.